Okay, we're going to talk about Booleans and the way Booleans work in ZBrush. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create a sphere, which I've already created here. Make sure that it is a Polymesh 3D. And then we are going to duplicate. That'll give me two spheres. And I'm going to change one of the spheres. So I'm just going to go into my transform menu here. I'm going to click on the little gear. I'm going to click on cylinder. And so now you have a cylinder. I'm going to rotate it around. I held shift so that I can unlock it in increments when I rotate. And now I have two objects or two subtools that are intersecting each other. And you can look in our subtool palette here, and you can see that we still have our sphere and we still have our cylinder. These are independent objects. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Control D, and that adds a divide. That basically just divides my poly count. It's the exact same as clicking on the geometry tab and hitting this divide function here. I'm going to hit click on delete lower. So now this is a just an object that has this specific number of polys, and we can't go higher or lower in the poly count. Okay, so now what we want to do is we're going to look at some of these features here with the subtools. So on the subtool, you'll notice that we have a union. That's what this little icon means here. We have a subtraction, and then we have a difference. So while these two are selected, we have the bottom subtool is going to affect the upper subtool. So if I click on subtraction, you can see that it doesn't look like anything happened. We can perform a function here which will let me go ahead and cut the this bottom cylinder out of the sphere, but I want to see what is actually happening. So ZBrush has provided this little tool up here in the upper left called Live Boolean. If I click that, now it's giving me a preview of what that cut will look like. So I can still adjust that subtool and it will affect the cut. Okay, so I can move that around, get the shape that I want. If I want to punch a hole through the object like so. Okay, so that lets me visually see what is happening with that subtool and how it's cutting. If I click this intersection, you can see that basically what's happening here is it's giving me the intersecting pieces of my 3D shapes. So you can see I've got a very complicated shape there. I'm going to go back to my subtraction now. Okay, so what we have to do in order to make this Boolean work, there are a couple of tools in here. We have like the Boolean, make Boolean mesh. We'll get into this a little bit later. I want to walk you through a way that will help you troubleshoot some issues whenever it comes to Boolean. So we're going to click on merge. We will be merging down, and this will merge these two shapes together in just a minute. But before we do that, we have to make sure that our Dynamesh is turned on. So I'm going to click on the geometry tab here, but before I do, I'm going to hold shift, click the geometry tab. That will allow both these tabs to stay open. So I'm going to select on my sphere. I'm going to go down to Dynamesh. Go ahead, and I'm going to change my Dynamesh to 300. Click whenever the orange button lights up, that means it's active. I'm going to click on my cylinder, go back to Dynamesh, change this one to 300 as well. Click Dynamesh. You can see that it is now active. Now both of these are now active. I'm going to click on the sphere. I'll click on merge down. It's going to tell me that this is a non-undoable operation. I'm going to hit always OK. And as soon as I do that, it looks like things have messed up. They have not. If we do any other functions at this point, they will be kind of stuck like this. But as soon as you hit merge down, you're going to hit Control, and then in the negative area out here, you're going to click and drag like a mask and let go, and you'll see that it has sliced through the object. Okay. And then we can hit Control Z. That'll bring it back in case we had some kind of funky thing that happens with our mesh. Sometimes the mesh will fall apart because the calculation wasn't strong. So you can hit undo, and you can change your settings here. So I can turn on my polish, Control, drag, and you can see that it softened up the edges a little bit. And this polish we'll talk about a little bit later. But I'm going to hit undo. We'll change this down to 8, and so you can see the difference there. So I can crank this up to say 190, drag. You see the edge is still really rough. You can change this to 600, click and drag. It will take a little bit, but the edge should be nice and sharp. So there you go. And then let's do this one more time so you can kind of see these complex operations. I'm going to hit Insert, Cylinder. I'm going to rotate my cylinder 90 degrees, scale it down, scale that out. I'm going to hit Dynamesh, go to Subtraction. You can see a very complicated shape. I'll click on my top cylinder, merge down, Control, click drag, and very complicated shape. And that is one of the ways to create some live Boolean shapes. So let's go ahead and insert the cylinder. Let's rotate the cylinder around 90 degrees. Scale this down like that. We're going to hit duplicate. We'll rotate our cylinder around 90 degrees. Scale this down. Like that. And so I'm just floating that cylinder inside this other cutout cylinder. Like that. And so now I can change, turn my Dynamesh on for cylinder 1, turn Dynamesh on for cylinder 2, and this time I'm going to leave these two still as a connection. So I'm going to click this one, merge down, click drag, and so now I can pull this out, but you can see that those are actually welded together. And you can tell if you have successfully merged shapes together by hitting the Q key for draw, hold Shift for smooth, and if you can smooth and it looks like they're kind of melted together, then they are successfully merged together. If you run a smooth around the edge and they're still sharp and they're moving away from each other like individual pieces, that means you did not hit Control and drag to Dynamesh them together. So let's do one more thing so that we can see how this works. I'm going to hit duplicate, like so, and then I'm going to insert a cube, scale that in because I want to do a funky little shape. So I want to use the cube and this weird double cylinder, and I wanted it to only grab that the interior aspects where these overlap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this difference, and you can see that my difference is showing that shape. So you will notice that it looks like everything else disappeared. So this bottom shape actually is affecting all of these shapes until we actually merge them down. So in order to not get confusing, I'm going to click on this cylinder shape, click this button, which lets me move it up in the subtool stack. I'm going to click on my cube, press up, and so now you can see that those are showing now, because this difference is no longer thinking that it is working on these shapes as well. But you can see, if I turn on my polyframe here, you can see the shape I'm using to cut, because I have it selected. I can turn that back off, and so this is giving me a really complicated shape. Now, if this is a little bit different, when I merge these two down, if I control drag to the outside, this is not going to behave how I want it to. I'll show you. First things first, always make sure your Dynamesh is turned on. Both objects, they were not. So here we go. So I'm going to make sure I'm selected on my top shape. I'm going to merge down to the one I'm cutting from. So merge down. If I click Control and drag to the outside, it's going to treat it as though I wanted to delete that shape. Hit Control Z for undo. Now this time, in order to make this shape that I actually want to create, under Dynamesh we have Add Subtract. If I hit Subtract, it's going to do the exact same thing it just did and slice that cube out. This time I'm going to click AND. So it says Dynamesh Union Sub. If I click that, now we get the shape. Okay, so that's how you can get some very complicated shapes inside of ZBrush with Booleans. You can turn off live boolean now because everything is already boolean together. And now we have these solid geometric shapes that are ready to continue to work on.